Welcome back to the green workbench. Today we're building a front porch checkerboard out of a 4x4 paint and bottle caps for pieces. And this is a cola versus root beer game board. And probably the best part about it as a family was going to the root beer store, picking out a bunch of different brands of root beer and having a taste test and deciding together which brand was the best. Now, I'm not going to influence your decision by telling you which one we thought was the best, because that's the fun of the process. So first thing is you are going to need a 4x4, and if you'll notice, these pieces are not perfectly cut or flush against each other. It has a real homemade feel to it. You can see the saw marks, you've got the kerf marks, they're not exactly even throughout the whole thing, and that's part of the appeal of this piece. So in order to achieve that, you want to measure to cut that 4x4 and set up your saw into squares. Now 4x4 really means about 3.5, so you want to measure that up, so you're making a 3.5 inch long cut. I did it on a table saw, just a 10-inch Delta table saw, but it can be done by hand or with the circular saw. Just clamp down the piece of wood and run the circular saw. Now I set the table saw up so that the blade didn't go all the way to the top of the 4x4, and it's only a 10-inch. So I would make one cut, turn it, make the next cut, and turn it until it cut all the way through. Now the great thing about that with a lower powered table saw, running a big heavy piece of wood through it, is that it's very difficult to get it nice and even. So you don't even have to try to get those imperfections. That's going to happen naturally. And that's exactly the look we're going for. So once you have all your pieces cut out, you need to glue them together. I started out by gluing a 3x3 section. Slather glue on all sides that are going to be touching another 4x4. Clamp those together and glue them up. And then I let it set overnight and glued that fourth row. Now, you can glue it all together at once. There's no need to do it two at a time. That's just the way I decided to do it. So your big concern when gluing it up is making sure it remains square. If you have a framing clamp, that works great, because that helps you keep it square by itself. Otherwise, the rule of thumb is to measure from corner to corner, and those measurements should be exactly the same, and that means you have it square. So glue them up, put them together, start your clamping process, and then take your measurements as you go. Adjust, move, adjust as you're clamping until you get it perfectly square, and then use those clamps to clamp it down. And you're going to need quite a few clamps so that you have pressure going both directions. This way and that way. You have it square, you've got it clamped up. Let it set overnight for that glue to dry. Next day you're going to have to scrape off the glue, because when you're using that much glue it's going to drip, and that's okay. That's part of the project. If after you clamp it you still feel like it's not going to stay together or your clamping isn't quite right, you can toenail, turn it over, and with a nail gun you can toenail nails into the pieces to keep them together. But really you don't need to. That glue is going to dry stronger than the wood, and you have lots of surface area glued together, so you should be fine. And next we'll move on to how to measure and paint. Okay, your first step in painting the project is to paint the entire thing, top, sides, and bottom, in a good primer sealer. Because remember, this is going to be outside on the front porch, so you want it to be weatherproof. So prime it and seal it really well. Let it sit overnight and dry. Now if we imagine this is primed and sealed, I need to mark my grid for the checkerboard. So I'm going to, on each of the corner squares, measure my halfway, which 3.5 inch blocks, so 1 3/4, go in each direction. And then I'll get a straight edge and mark out my grid lines, and then do it for each additional row and column. So now it's all marked out. And remember, we're going for this homemade look. So there's no need to do fancy tape jobs and all that. We are going to just do it by hand. So we'll take a medium width brush and brush the majority of the squares. And then once that's done, with each color, go back with a finer brush to cut the lines. Now, using the traditional red and black, I was able to use those colors. If I made a mistake and went over the line, they are thick enough that I could go back and cut the line right over top of it, and you can't even tell. So a little careful work by hand. It takes some time, but it looks great, and it's not perfect, so that fits in with the whole goal of the project. So now your top is finished with your checkerboard, and you have a blank, empty sides. So you have to figure out what you're going to do with the sides, if anything. Okay, for the sides, they looked very blank and empty to me. You can choose what you want to do. It's up to your creativity. I decided to paint different four-letter sayings on each one. You can see here it says home. Then one side says game to go along with the checkers. And I just freehand painted that on each side. So as you turn it or get to another angle, you'll read a different word. So you now have your checkerboard done. Top is painted, signs are decorated. You can, you know, for the sides, whatever you want. If you want to actually glue things on and Mod Podge over it, whatever works for you. Now you need to figure out a base. What are you going to put it on so that it sits on your porch at a comfortable level to play? Okay. So anything that you have around that looks good with the decor of your porch will work for your pedestal. What I did was I took an old ammo crate. It's a wooden ammo crate. I like the fact that it has this metal banding around it. And then I took some extra pieces, squares of 4x4 that I cut, and I painted those with a white and black checkered pattern just on the outside portions. So you can see on the inside I just left it with that primer sealer white. So we've got the legs, the body, and then I placed the game board on top of that, and it's just about the right height for the chairs that I've got on the front porch. Works out perfectly. So any kind of wine crate, fruit crate, barrel, anything that works with your porch would look great. You just need to remember that it needs to look homemade and used so that it matches with the feel of the checkerboard. And that's it. It's an easy project. It takes a couple days because of glue dry times and paint dry times, and a steady hand with the painting. But it looks great. It's a lot of fun to play, and we'll see if the cola or the root beer wins out in the end. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for other great how-to videos.